Good evening, everyone. Um, Thank you for making me a part of this Saturday's Sojourns. Um, yeah. So, first of all, let me introduce Sri Lanka to you all. It's a little below India, and we have a similar climate as in, of course, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, Maldives, and a similar type of vegetation and a planting palette that can be seen here in these countries. And I'm sure that you all know that Sri Lanka was known as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. To date, we hold a very strong geopolitical position as well because of the location of Sri Lanka. It's a country that can within a 4 hours of drive that you can reach to all to a different climate. I would say we have if you go into up country, it's a cold climate which can be anywhere less than 10 centigrades, and if you go further up north, it can be even as worst as 40 degrees. And this, with the location and the climatic conditions, I think we have a very nutritious plant media that anything will grow, anything that you put in the soil. If you and because of this, Sri Lanka we have our own plantations of back in the day. It was mainly spices, but then with the foreign brewing, we had coffee and tea, and then to date we are more or less self-sufficient in terms of rice and all the spices and most of the vegetables, and of course fruits. So, as I mentioned earlier, a beautiful garden is a part of the Sri Lankan culture or the lifestyle. No matter whether you are doing a job and live in a shanty, or whether you are a royal who lives in a palace, still you had a garden. In earlier days, before Christ, Sri Lankan civilization started along, of course, after the Aryans coming into Sri Lanka. The civilization started along reservoirs and the river-based villages. It was a agriculture-based civilization, and when Buddhism came to Sri Lanka, a temple was added to their lifestyle or the culture or the environment that they lived in. And these temples in Buddhism, they worship the temple that provided shade to Lord Buddha when he enlightened. So that was the main part of the temple, and they offer various flowers to Lord Buddha. So eventually these flowering plants that you can offer, became a part of the temple. And to date, even some of the houses that you go to in Sri Lanka, whether it's a house of a royal or it's a house of a commoner, you'll still see a lot of plants that's being offered to Lord Buddha, planted in their gardens. And if you go back to and look at Anuradhapura kingdom, which was again before Christ, there are still ruins of the Royal Botanical Gardens, and especially the ruins of temples will show that in present day we would call it a park or a resort. It's beautiful pathways, nicely done, laid out roads, and then grown jungles. And they have done a lot of forestry as well. And even in Anuradhapura, even in Polonnaru, it's the same. And these were all again river-based civilizations, having agriculture as their main profession, and farming as their main profession. And then when it came to Sigiriya or Kotte, these kings were looking for protection. So they had protected themselves by creating a water barrier and various sorts of things to make it difficult to come and take over the kingdom. So these Sigiriya, if you look at Sigiriya, it's if you see the road system, it's a very symmetrical layout, and the planting. To date you see fruit garden, and then and gardens. They say the fragrance garden, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So where you see all these sorts of beautifully laid out landscapes, and Sri Lanka, anyway, being a tropical country and being with its location, the natural landscape itself is pretty extravagant. It's a landscape where you just need to I would say recorrect or complement whatever that's being put in there by other humans. If an architect does a house, we do complement the architecture of the house by landscape and merging the two, the existing landscape of the property into the new landscape that we do, so that the house and the residence will become a part of that environment. I think at present Sri Lankan architects and the clients or the builders, they use a lot of professional help when it comes to landscaping, especially I think after late Jeffrey Bawa, who made the buildings or the spaces of the buildings that he designed a part of the garden, or brought the garden inside into the house or to the building or to the space. So how I would quickly touch upon how Jeffrey was influenced to become an architect. That was because of brief. His brother, late Bevis Bawa, who was a planter, and at one point who was the ADC to the last 4 British governors, who worked as an honorary service with the government. His parents had given him a 200 acres of rubber estate at the age of 20, when he was a planter. After him becoming a planter, to take care of it and run it as the head of the family, because their father had passed away by then. And after Bevis moved into this estate bungalow, to the manager's bungalow, he was expanding the house and the garden, eventually which became a 5.5 acres of garden. And he says the garden and the house stopped growing when when he ran out of money. That's in the 60s. So up until this property was given to him in 1929, and up until 1960 or late 60s, it has been just growing. To add more into it, this is the only private garden in Sri Lanka, and then tourist minister, who was the first executive president of Sri Lanka, late Jayajawardena, had invited Bevis to open this to the public, because this was the only tourism was booming in Sri Lanka at that time, and Bentara Resort was designed and being built by Jeffrey Bawa, and the only tourist attractions were one of the old temples, lovely beaches in the area. So the Jayajawardena had invited Bevis to open this to the public, and this was opened to the public in 1969. And ever since it's open it's open to date, and a lot of visitors from all around the world visit the place. And it's a garden, it's a garden that was influenced by his foreign travels. I would say it's a European garden, and when you walk in there, you will see a lot of vistas and surprises, and a lot of life in it, a lot of color in it. And this garden, there is a Spanish garden, what he says, that he was influenced from his travels to Alhambra. Then there's Japanese garden, and he says from his trip to Far East in the 50s that he was influenced to do this. And in this you see a lot of hardscapes and a lot of monuments, a lot of statues and sculptures in the garden, which was done together with another Australian artist who lived there with Bevis, called Donald Friend, and of course some other artwork by Barbara Sansoni, late Barbara Sansoni, who was one of their close friends, and another lot of artwork by many other artists, including Russell Drysdale, an Australian artist, and from Sri Lanka, I would say a lot of late Lucky Saranaga's artwork, sculptures, and paintings are there. Today Brief is a place where a lot of students from Sri Lanka and other foreign countries who come there to learn and to see, and they say they get influenced by Brief, just like Jeffrey Bawa, and who was influenced to basically to have who wanted to have a similar property. Then he went and bought Lunuganga estate, where which was also rubber estate, and then to develop it he had to learn architecture. So he went back to England and went to the architecture school, and he came back as an architect, and he developed his own little kingdom there, which is known as Lunuganga, and that's how he became an architect, and he gave up being a solicitor, a barrister, and ever since he started building hotels, houses, which the landscape was a major part of, and Lunuganga also a major, a huge, a very, very, very British garden, I would say. It's the serenity there you can't find anywhere else, and the biodiversity, and I would say it's a grown jungle. I think with the tourism boom and the hotels coming up in Sri Lanka, opened an opportunity to landscape gardening or landscape architecture to develop as a profession. And the rich and the elite has always been getting help from someone. Actually, how it happened was after Bevis laid out brief in let's say after 1940s, after independence, the rich and elite and the diplomats who were living in Sri Lanka, the I would say the cream of the crop, they invited Bevis to do their gardens, and that's how Bevis became a landscape gardener. And then later on, he helped his brother in various of his projects, and especially Bentoro Beach Hotel, which is to date is a architectural marvel. I would say it's in a peninsula, and it's in a peninsula, so you get the river on one side and sea on the other side, and it's one place that a lot of foreigners would go and want to stay in Sri Lanka or to see. And ever since a lot of associates who worked with Jeffrey Bawa, Bevis Bawa, and Jeffrey had taken up landscape gardening as a profession. And then later on, the Sri Lankan University University of Moratuwa had started, and University of Peradeniya had started offering landscape architecture masters for those who have completed their first degree in architecture. And now we have 30 to 40 landscape architects coming out every year, and it's becoming competitive in the market, and still they have a lot of jobs, and a lot of development is going on around in the country, even though we had a bit of problems during the pandemic, and then before that the Easter tax. But now the construction has slowly started again, and everyone's getting busy with their jobs. So I was an architect. I studied architecture and returned to Sri Lanka probably about 13 years ago, and just after the war. And I worked with an architect called Jayasinghe, who was also I would say an assistant, or who did his training with Jeffrey Bawa in the late 80s. And so with Vinod I worked for almost 2 years, and then a lot of and my father was Bevis Bawa's manager. So we are the current owner. My father is the current owner of Brief, and then he did a lot of work with Jeffrey Bawa. Again, I would say his signature project is Kandaram Hotel, which is built on a rock, and now it's covered with a jungle. And I think Kandaram was where it influenced me to become an architect. And so being at Brief and being with my father being in the profession, I had the opportunity of associating a lot of architects, and as close as my family. And they all said, I think they all wanted me to take up my father's practice. So I took it up, and now I'm running his design practice, and we have a staff of about 10 landscape architects and a few interns who are from the local University of Moratuwa. And we do a lot of local projects, such as houses to resorts to industrial projects to I would say commercial projects, and it's I'm happy that I took up on landscape architecture, and yeah, I would say, but it would have still been great to be an architect. But I think it helps me with my architecture knowledge and design knowledge, the design practice I had working with the firms that I worked in, where I was trained, and the studies I did in Thailand and in Australia. So I think in terms of technology and technology issues, the root balling was taught to my father and late Lucky Naika back in the late 70s by a team of foreign team. This was to bring in trees to the Parliament complex that was designed by late Jeffrey Bawa, and ever since road building, I think now there are almost thousands of nurseries and with properly root ball trees, and now we buy our plants from them. And to date, some of them are there who was trained under either late Lucky Naika or either under my father. And we in Sri Lanka we don't use a lot of machinery such as the root balling machine or anything. But then again, we do the drain boards or the drain cells were also we started using maybe in the mid 2000s with one of the major projects that happened that came up in Sri Lanka, major development with about 1,200 plus apartments and a garden of about 28,000 square meters, and on a rooftop garden. So that there we had to use drain boards, and ever since the geotextile and drain boards is a part of our game, I would say. And the knowledge I also learned from some of the staff we have, and the practical knowledge they have is it cannot be matched by any of us. And to the road balling, the watering, they sometimes even when it comes to certain projects and certain regions or certain areas that we work in, I would ask some of the people who has worked with us over the last 30-40 years, and in terms of the selection of the trees, and that's a knowledge, and that's not something that can be matched and or learned. Sri Lanka, in terms of the industry is definitely growing, and with the port city coming in, with the development that they are planning in tourism, and the apartments that's going to come in, definitely there's the major boom in landscape architecture, and it's a good field to be in. And the architects in Sri Lanka also they value the landscape part of it. They think that it does complement their work. So it's the job of the landscape architect or the designer to maintain that and bring out the best of the architect also with what they do. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. Hope you all have a good evening.